The diplomatic station called Harmony's Gate floated in the darkness between star systems. It belonged to no one species and welcomed everyone. The station was massive, built over 40 years by 47 different alien races working together. Its purpose was simple: keep the peace. For 300 years, the Galactic Collective had achieved what most thought impossible. War was extinct. Fighting was a thing of the past. Every problem could be solved with words and compromise. Humanity had joined this peaceful alliance only 5 years ago. The humans were newcomers, curious and eager. They brought with them strange foods, unusual music, and technologies that impressed even the oldest species. Most importantly, they seemed peaceful. They had passed every test, signed every treaty, and promised to leave their violent past behind. The Cultural Exchange Festival happened once every Earth year. Species from across the galaxy gathered to share their traditions, foods, and customs. The main plaza of Harmony's Gate transformed into a carnival of colors and sounds. Vendors sold items from 1,000 worlds. Performers demonstrated dances that defied gravity. Children of various species played together, finding games that needed no common language. 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez held her father's hand as they walked through the festival. Her eyes were wide with wonder. She had never seen so many different kinds of people before. There were beings made of crystal who sang in harmonic frequencies. There were floating jellyfish-like creatures who communicated through bioluminescent patterns. There were tall, elegant beings with too many arms and beings so small they needed mechanical suits to be seen. Emma's father, Miguel Rodriguez, was a maintenance engineer on the station. He worked long hours keeping the human section running smoothly, but today was special. Today was Emma's birthday, and he had promised her a full day at the festival. His wife, Maria, walked beside them, recording everything on her device. She wanted Emma to remember this day forever. They stopped at a Vraxian cultural booth. The Vraxians were reptilian beings about 7 feet tall with scales that shimmered between blue and green. They had been part of the collective for over 2 centuries. The Vraxian manning the booth was named Kelthix. He was a trade delegate, someone who helped negotiate deals between species. He seemed friendly and enthusiastic about sharing his culture. Kelthix spoke through a translator device that converted his hissing language into perfect English. "Welcome, welcome. Please come see the traditional crafts of my people. This is a greeting ceremony vessel. We use it during first meetings to show peaceful intentions." Emma stepped closer, fascinated by the ornate bowl Kelthix held. It was made of a metal that seemed to shift colors in the light. Miguel started to tell Emma not to get too close, but Kelthix seemed so gentle and welcoming. The Vraxian bent down to Emma's level, which parents across the galaxy recognized as a friendly gesture toward young ones. Would the small human like to participate in a traditional Vraxian greeting? It is completely harmless, I assure the parents. We do this with younglings of all species. Maria looked at Miguel. They had been encouraged to participate in cultural exchanges. It was supposed to build understanding between species. Emma's eyes were bright with excitement. She loved learning about aliens and their ways. Miguel nodded slowly. "Is it safe?" Maria asked. "Absolutely. The collective has approved all our demonstration rituals. Nothing harmful is ever used at these festivals." What happened next would be debated for years in courts and war rooms across the galaxy. Kelthix raised his hand toward Emma, palm forward. It was meant to be a gesture where bioelectric fields would gently touch, creating a tingling sensation that Vraxian children found pleasant. Kelthix had done this demonstration hundreds of times before with other species. He had never had a problem, but humans were different. Their biology was unique in ways that the collective's medical databases had not fully cataloged. Human children, in particular, had sensitivities that varied wildly from other species' offspring. When Kelthix released his bioelectric greeting, the field that touched Emma was supposed to feel like a gentle static shock. Instead, the girl's body seized. The electric current, harmless to 99% of known species, reacted catastrophically with human neurochemistry. Emma screamed. Her back arched. Smoke rose from where the energy field touched her skin. Miguel moved faster than he knew he could. He grabbed Emma and pulled her away, but the damage was done. Emma collapsed in her father's arms, unconscious. Her skin showed angry burn marks across her chest and arms. Her heart rhythm was erratic. Maria was screaming. People were running toward them from all directions. Kelthix stood frozen, his hand still extended. His translator device captured his words perfectly. "I don't understand. This has never happened before. I followed all protocols. What went wrong? Station medical teams arrived within 90 seconds. The human doctor took one look at Emma and started barking orders. They rushed the girl to the medical bay, her parents running alongside the floating stretcher. Celtics tried to follow to explain to help, but security personnel held him back. In the medical bay, human doctors worked frantically. Emma's heart had stopped twice already. They managed to restart it both times, but her brain activity was wrong. The scans showed patterns that made the head doctor curse under her breath. Emma Rodriguez had slipped into a coma. Whether she would wake up was uncertain. The news spread through the station like electricity through water. Humans working in various sections heard what happened. Engineers, scientists, teachers, merchants, they all stopped what they were doing. They all had the same question: how badly was the child hurt? When the official report came through, the mood among humans shifted. It was subtle at first. Conversations became quieter. Smiles disappeared. Human personnel started moving with purpose toward specific locations. Those who knew the signs recognized it. Humans were organizing. Celtics was taken to a collective security office for questioning. He cooperated fully, explaining everything he had done. He showed them the approved ceremony guidelines. He demonstrated the bioelectric field strength on testing equipment. Everything was within accepted parameters. It should have been completely safe. I am devastated, Celtics told the collective investigators. I would never intentionally harm a child of any species. This was a terrible accident. I will do whatever is necessary to make amends. My government will pay for all medical expenses and provide compensation to the family. This is standard protocol for accidental injuries during cultural exchanges. The collective's legal team nodded. This was indeed standard protocol. Accidents happened occasionally during first contact situations or cultural exchanges. Species had different biologies, different tolerances. Sometimes things went wrong despite best intentions. The system had procedures for this: compensation, medical care, official apologies. These usually resolved matters satisfactorily. Ambassador David Chen was the senior human diplomat on Harmony's Gate. He was a veteran of Earth's diplomatic corps, someone who had spent decades building bridges between nations on Earth before humanity reached the stars. He was known for being calm, reasonable, and skilled at finding compromises. When the collective's representatives contacted him about the incident, they expected he would help smooth things over. Chen listened to their explanation. He reviewed the evidence. He watched the security footage of the incident from 3 different angles. Then he made a call to Earth. The call lasted 4 hours. When it ended, his face had changed. The warm, diplomatic expression was gone, replaced by something harder. The family wants Celtics arrested and turned over to human authorities for prosecution, Chen said flatly. The collective representatives blinked in confusion. Several of them literally blinked, though some had different methods of expressing surprise. Ambassador Chen, this was an accident. A tragic accident, but an accident nonetheless. The proper procedure is arbitration through the collective council, followed by compensation. We have systems for this. The Rodriguez family does not accept your systems as adequate, Chen replied. A human child lies in a coma. Her future is uncertain. Her parents demand justice under human law. But Ambassador Celtics is a Vraxian diplomat. He has immunity under collective law, and he followed all approved protocols. There was no negligence, no malice. Surely you understand that prosecuting him would set a dangerous precedent. Chen's eyes were cold. I understand that a human child was hurt. That is the only precedent that matters to humanity. The collective representatives tried to explain. They talked about cultural differences, about the importance of understanding that different species had different concepts of justice. They emphasized that the collective had maintained peace for 3 centuries precisely because they had fair, neutral systems for resolving disputes. Chen listened silently. When they finished, he spoke carefully. Gentlemen, ladies, and honored beings, I need to make something clear about human culture. Our children are not simply smaller versions of adults. They are not like the rapidly maturing offspring of many of your species. Human children are vulnerable for years. Protecting them is written into our deepest biological programming. Every human culture, across all of our history, has special protections for children. Harming a child, even accidentally, carries severe consequences. We understand your concern for your young, one of the representatives said gently. But surely rational beings can see that this situation requires a measured response. The collective offers full medical support, financial compensation, and a formal apology from the Vraxian government. What more can be done? Celtics can be turned over to human authorities. That is not possible under collective law. Chen stood slowly. Then we have a problem. The meeting ended badly. Chen filed a formal complaint with the collective council, demanding an emergency session to address the incident. The council agreed to meet within 72 hours. Standard procedure for serious diplomatic disputes. Those 72 hours changed everything. Human families across the station quietly began packing. They told their alien neighbors they were taking precautionary leaves. Visiting relatives needed vacations. Within 24 hours, half the human civilians on Harmony's Gate had departed. Within 48 hours, only essential human personnel remained. On Earth and every human colony, the news coverage was constant. Images of Emma Rodriguez before the incident showed a smiling, bright-eyed girl. Images from the medical bay showed machines keeping her alive, her small body swallowed by medical equipment. Public opinion was unified in a way that politicians noted with concern. Humans across space were angry, but it was a cold anger. There were no riots, no protests. Instead, there was organization. Military reservists received quiet activation orders. Defense contractors saw their stock prices surge as government orders flooded in. Shipyards that had been idle suddenly buzzed with activity. The collective council met on schedule. Representatives from 47 species gathered in the Grand Council chamber on Harmony's Gate. They debated for 6 hours. The discussion was passionate. Some species argued that humans needed to understand collective law and accept its jurisdiction. Others worried about the precedent of giving in to demands backed by implied threats. A few urged compromise, suggesting a joint human collective tribunal. In the end, the vote was clear. 31 species voted to protect Celtics under diplomatic immunity. 12 abstained. Only 4 voted with humanity. Ambassador Chen received the decision via official transmission. He read it once, then read it again to be certain he understood. Then he composed a message to Earth. The message was brief. 6 hours later, Chen requested one final meeting with the collective council. They granted it immediately, hoping he would announce humanity's acceptance of their decision. Instead, Chen delivered a 3-sentence statement. Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Collective effective immediately. All treaties and agreements between humanity and the collective are void. We will remember this decision. Then he walked out. Within minutes, every human vessel in collective space began moving. Trade ships changed course for human territory. Research vessels abandoned their studies. Even the few human military ships operating under collective joint defense agreements simply left, ignoring hails and requests for explanation. The collective's communication networks tried to reach Earth. Every channel returned the same automated message. Humanity is no longer accepting communications from collective members. Do not attempt further contact. It took 6 hours for the full scope of humanity's withdrawal to become apparent. Every human colony had closed its borders. Human technology licenses were revoked. Human medical techniques were no longer shared. Human star charts and navigation data were wiped from collective databases. And everywhere, in every human community across dozens of star systems, people watched the news of Emma Rodriguez, the little girl who still slept in her coma, the little girl whose injury had somehow ended 3 centuries of galactic peace. Nobody knew yet, but the war had already begun. The first week after humanity's withdrawal was marked by confusion. The collective council held emergency sessions every day, trying to understand what had happened. Surely humans would calm down. Surely reason would prevail. They had simply overreacted to a tragic accident. Time would heal the wounds. The collective's economists were the first to panic. They ran the numbers 3 times because they couldn't believe the initial results. Human trade represented 18% of the collective's total economic activity. Human medical technology had reduced mortality rates across 15 species. Human engine designs had cut travel times by 40%. Human food crops had solved famine problems on 7 worlds. All of that vanished overnight. Ships that had been scheduled to deliver human goods simply never arrived. Factories that relied on human-designed components couldn't get replacements. Hospitals that had adopted human medical procedures found themselves without the necessary equipment or pharmaceutical supplies. It was an economic catastrophe unfolding in slow motion. But the collective had weathered problems before. They would adapt. They would find alternatives. They had 46 other species with their own technologies and resources. Humanity was just one species among many. Then the collective's intelligence agencies started filing their reports. The reports came from analysts who had been monitoring human space for the past 5 years. These analysts had always found humans interesting. Humans were energetic, creative, sometimes aggressive in business dealings, but generally peaceful. They had messy politics but functional democracies. They had been integrating well into collective society, but now the analysts were going back through their data with new perspective. They were looking for things they had missed. They were finding them. Commander Thelzara of Collective Intelligence stood before the council to present findings. Thelzara was a Kisrathi, a species known for analytical thinking and attention to detail. Her 4 eyes could focus on different documents simultaneously. Her reputation for thoroughness was unmatched. Honored Council, we have discovered irregularities in human activities during their membership in the collective. These irregularities went unnoticed because they were technically legal, but the pattern is disturbing. She displayed star charts on the council chamber's main screen. Red dots appeared throughout the displayed region of space. These are human colonies that were registered with the collective. Note their positions. The red dots formed a rough sphere around human core territory. Now these are human outposts and research stations. Blue dots appeared scattered much further out. And these. Green dots materialized in locations far from established space lanes. Are human survey beacons and automated mining facilities. The map now showed humanity's presence extending much farther than anyone had realized. But more concerning was what came next. We have now identified 17 locations where humans built facilities that were never registered with the collective. Orange dots appeared in the display. They were in deep space in nebulas around dead stars, places where nobody would think to look. We sent reconnaissance drones to 3 of these locations. What we found was disturbing. Images appeared on the screen. Massive structures floating in space, ships in various stages of construction, weapon testing ranges marked by debris fields. These are shipyards, military shipyards. At this facility alone, we counted 173 ships under construction. These are not exploration vessels or trade ships. These are warships. The council chamber erupted in noise. Representatives demanded explanations. How had this gone undetected? Why had humans built military vessels in violation of collective disarmament treaties? Thelzara waited for silence before continuing. It gets worse. We analyzed the construction timeline based on the manufacturing signatures. These facilities have been active for at least 4 years, meaning humans began building warships within months of joining the collective. One of the council members, a Morthani diplomat named Valesh, stood to speak. Commander, are you suggesting that humanity joined the collective with the intention of eventually making war? I am suggesting that humans never truly disarmed. They hid their military capabilities from us. They learned about every species in the collective while keeping secrets about themselves. They built weapons in the shadows while smiling and trading with us in the light. The revelation sent shockwaves through the collective. Emergency meetings were called. Security protocols were reviewed. Questions piled up faster than answers could be found. But one question dominated all others. What were humans planning to do with those ships? Meanwhile, Kelthix sat in a secured apartment on Harmony's Gate. He was not technically under arrest, but he was not free to leave either. For his own protection, the collective had explained. There were angry humans on the station who might try to harm him. Kelthix spent his time trying to understand what had gone wrong. He watched the footage of the incident repeatedly. He reviewed his training documents. He consulted with Vraxian medical experts about human biology. Every analysis came to the same conclusion. He had done nothing wrong. The incident was a terrible accident caused by an unknown incompatibility between Vraxian bioelectricity and human neurochemistry. So why were humans reacting this way? Kelthix decided to study human history. His translator device connected him to human data networks that were still accessible. He started with general overview documents about human culture. What he learned disturbed him. Humans had been fighting wars for their entire recorded history. Not occasional conflicts like some species experienced during their pre-spaceflight years. Constant, never-ending warfare. The human historical record was an unbroken chain of violence stretching back thousands of years. But what really frightened Kelthix was learning about human concepts of total war. Most species in the collective had never developed such doctrines. When pre-spaceflight civilizations fought, they fought over territory or resources. They fought until one side won whatever was being contested. Then they stopped. Humans didn't fight like that. When humans truly committed to war, they fought to completely destroy their enemy's ability to resist. They bombed cities. They targeted civilians. They blockaded food supplies to starve populations. They had even used nuclear weapons on their own species, killing hundreds of thousands in single attacks. Celtics found documentation of something called the Second World War. He read about it for hours, barely believing what he was learning. Over 70 million humans had died. Entire cities had been reduced to rubble. The conflict had consumed 6 years and involved most of the planet. The scale of destruction was beyond anything in Vraxian history, and that was just one war. Humans had fought dozens of major conflicts, hundreds of smaller ones. They had committed genocides against their own species. They had developed weapons specifically designed to cause maximum suffering. They had a cultural concept called weapons of mass destruction that was unique among collective species. Celtics read about human protective instincts toward offspring. Multiple sources emphasized the same point. Humans were extraordinarily defensive of their children. Harming a child was considered one of the worst crimes in every human culture. Even human criminals imprisoned for terrible acts would attack other prisoners who had hurt children. The realization hit Celtics like physical impact. He had hurt a human child, not intentionally, not through negligence, but he had hurt her nonetheless. And now her species was preparing for war. He tried to explain this to his collective handlers. They needed to understand what they were facing. But the collective's representatives didn't want to hear it. They talked about humans being more advanced now, more civilized. They said humanity had left its violent past behind when they reached the stars. Celtics knew better now. Humans hadn't left their violent past behind. They had just hidden it carefully and waited for an excuse to bring it back out. The first attack happened 18 days after humanity's withdrawal from the collective. A remote collective research station in the Kepler 186 system stopped responding to communications. When a collective patrol ship arrived to investigate, they found the station destroyed. Debris floated where laboratories and living quarters had been. 43 scientists and support staff were dead. The patrol ship's scanners found residual signatures from weapons fire. The analysis was conclusive: human weapons. But there was something strange about the attack pattern. The weapons used were older models, the kind that independent human colonies might have. Not military-grade equipment from Earth or major colonies. 3 days later, another attack. A collective mining facility in a system near human space was raided. The automated defenses were destroyed and valuable rare minerals were stolen. Again, the weapons signatures indicated human origin, but not official military hardware. The pattern continued. Small outposts, isolated facilities, vulnerable targets, they were being hit by what appeared to be independent human groups. Pirates, maybe, or angry colonists taking revenge. The attacks were concerning, but not catastrophic. The collective could absorb these losses. The collective's military command analyzed the situation. They concluded that Earth's government had lost control over its more aggressive elements. Frontier colonists and radical groups were acting without official sanction. The solution was to make a show of force, to demonstrate that the collective would not tolerate these attacks. Fleet Admiral Corvin, a Hesloki military leader with 2 centuries of service, was placed in command of a task force. His orders were clear: proceed to the edge of human space and establish a defensive perimeter. Make it clear to humanity that further attacks would not be tolerated. Corvin assembled an impressive fleet, 5,000 vessels representing the combined military might of the collective. Battleships, carriers, cruisers, destroyers, every species contributed ships. It was the largest military gathering since the formation of the collective 3 centuries ago. The fleet departed amid great ceremony. Representatives from all species watched the ships leave, confident that this display of unity and strength would bring humanity back to reason. Surely even aggressive humans would not dare fight against such overwhelming force. The fleet traveled for 6 days to reach their designated position. They established their perimeter and began broadcasting messages to human space. The messages were firm but not hostile. The collective did not want war. They wanted dialogue. They wanted the attacks to stop. They were willing to negotiate a peaceful resolution. The response came on the seventh day. Not a diplomatic message, not a communication at all. 200 human ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of scanner range. They were smaller than collective vessels, more compact. Their designs were utilitarian, built for function rather than appearance. They moved with a coordination that spoke of constant training and battlefield communication. Admiral Corvin was not worried. His fleet outnumbered the humans 25-1. He sent a final message to the human ships offering them one more chance to withdraw peacefully. The human response was 5 words delivered in a female voice that was calm and cold. "You've made your choice. Goodbye." Then the human fleet attacked. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. The humans didn't charge forward in a straight assault. They split into smaller groups, each group moving with impossible coordination. Their ships were faster than anything the collective had. Their weapons had longer range. The first salvo from human forces didn't target shields. It targeted sensor arrays and communication relays. Within the first 3 minutes of combat, the collective fleet's coordination network was shattered. Ships that had been working as a unified force suddenly found themselves isolated, unable to communicate effectively with nearby vessels. Then the real killing began. Human ships darted between collective vessels like predatory fish. Their weapons were precise and devastating. They didn't try to destroy ships outright. Instead, they targeted life support systems, engine cores, power distribution networks. They wanted collective crews to die slowly, suffocating or freezing in disabled ships. And they broadcast everything. Every attack was recorded. Every scream from dying crew members was captured and transmitted across all frequencies. The humans wanted every ship in the collective fleet to hear what was happening to their colleagues. Admiral Corvin tried to organize a response. He attempted to reform his battle lines, to concentrate fire, to use his numerical advantage. But human tactics were unpredictable, chaotic in a way that seemed calculated. They would attack from one direction, then suddenly appear from another. They used asteroid fields and debris as cover. They sacrificed their own ships in coordinated strikes that took out multiple collective vessels. 6 hours into the battle, Corvin realized he was going to lose. His fleet had lost over 3,000 ships. The humans had lost 17. The mathematics were impossible, the casualty ratio beyond anything in military history. He gave the order to retreat. The human ships pursued the fleeing collective fleet for 2 more hours, destroying another 300 vessels before finally breaking off their attack. When the survivors finally made it back to collective space, less than half of the original 5,000 ships returned. That night, every species in the collective received a transmission. It came on all channels simultaneously, impossible to block or ignore. The speaker was a human woman wearing a military uniform. Her rank insignia identified her as a fleet admiral. "My name is Sarah Okonkwo, Supreme Commander of the United Human Defense Fleet. Today you learned what happens when you threaten humanity. This was a small lesson. Your fleet outnumbered ours and we destroyed it anyway. We did this to send a message." Okonkwo's face was expressionless, her voice never rising above a conversational tone. Somehow that made her words more frightening. "Emma Rodriguez remains in a coma. Until she wakes, until we know she will recover, this war continues. You had one chance to make this right. You chose to protect the person who hurt her. Now you will learn the price of that choice." The transmission showed battle footage. Collective ships exploding. Crew members dying. The destruction was presented clinically without emotion or commentary. "Every day Emma Rodriguez remains unconscious, we will destroy 10 collective facilities. Stations, colonies, industrial complexes, we will select targets randomly. We will not negotiate. We will not accept surrender. When the girl wakes, we will consider whether your species deserve to continue existing." Okonkwo leaned forward slightly, her eyes boring into the camera. "You wanted to understand humanity. We are the species that killed billions of our own kind over ideology and resources. We poisoned our own planet and kept fighting anyway. We built weapons that could sterilize worlds and aimed them at ourselves. And we did all that to other humans. Imagine what we will do to you." The transmission ended with a final image. Emma Rodriguez in her hospital bed, machines keeping her alive, her parents sitting beside her holding her small hands. Across the galaxy, trillions of beings watched that image and understood. The war wasn't about territory or politics. It wasn't about treaties or diplomatic principles. It was about one sleeping child and a species that would burn down civilizations to avenge her. The humans had finally shown their true nature, and the galaxy was terrified. Admiral Okonkwo kept her promise. Every day that Emma Rodriguez remained in her coma, 10 collective facilities ceased to exist. The targets were chosen seemingly at random, which made the terror worse. Nobody knew where humans would strike next. A mining colony on the frontier, a research station studying nebula formations, an agricultural processing center feeding 3 billion people, all of them destroyed with clinical precision. The attacks followed a pattern that collective military analysts found deeply disturbing. Human forces never fought fair battles. They hit targets when defenses were minimal. They used overwhelming force against weak opponents. They retreated immediately when faced with significant resistance, only to strike somewhere else hours later. It was the strategy of a predator, not a warrior. And it was devastatingly effective. The Collective Council met in emergency session for the 37th time since the war began. The Grand Council Chamber, once filled with optimistic talk of peace and cooperation, now hosted arguments about survival. Species that had been friends for centuries were turning on each other, trading accusations and blame. "We should surrender Kelthix," said Ambassador Varesh of the Morthani delegation. "This entire war is about him. Give the humans what they want, and this madness ends." The Vraxian representative, Minister Coxtar, rose to protest. "We cannot abandon one of our own to human revenge. Kelthix committed no crime. This would set a precedent that any species could demand extradition of our citizens whenever they claim offense. Better one person face human justice than millions die," Varesh shot back. "We have lost over 4,000 facilities. Civilian casualties are approaching 200,000. For what? To protect diplomatic immunity?" Other voices joined the argument. Some species wanted to fight harder, to strike at human civilian targets and show that the collective could be ruthless too. Others advocated complete surrender. A few suggested they should simply withdraw from systems near human space and abandon that entire region of the galaxy. Through all the debate, Ambassador Chen sat quietly. He was still technically the human representative to the collective, though he no longer attended regular sessions. Today he had been summoned to hear a proposal. The Council's senior mediator, a being named Thesara, who had resolved conflicts for 300 years, addressed Chen directly. "Ambassador, we wish to negotiate an end to hostilities. The collective is prepared to offer significant concessions, full reparations to the Rodriguez family, funding for human medical research to prevent future incidents, a formal apology signed by every member species, and a trial for Kelthix where human representatives would serve as judges alongside collective jurists. What would humanity require to end this war?" Chen looked at Thesara for a long moment before responding. When he spoke, his voice was tired. "You still don't understand. This war isn't about justice for Emma Rodriguez. It never was. Emma was the spark that lit a fire humanity has been building for 5 years." "What do you mean?" Thesara asked. "We joined your collective as a test. We wanted to see if different species could truly coexist peacefully. We hoped you would be better than us, that your 3 centuries of peace meant you had evolved beyond the tribal violence that defines human history. But we needed to know what would happen if something went wrong." Chen stood and walked to the chamber's main window. Outside, the stars shined with their usual indifference. "We didn't expect Emma to get hurt. That was genuine accident. But your response told us everything we needed to know. When protecting one of your own conflicted with justice for ours, you chose yourselves. You hid behind laws and procedures. You didn't try to understand our perspective. You just assumed your way was the right way. So you used that child's injury as an excuse for war?" Thesara's voice carried shock and disgust. "No," Chen said quietly. "We're using it as an excuse for conquest." "There's a difference," the council chamber erupted. Representatives shouted questions and accusations. Chen waited for silence before continuing. "Humanity learned a long time ago that peace only exists between equals. The strong dominate the weak unless the weak can threaten the strong. Your collective works because everyone agreed to be peaceful. But that peace was always fragile. One aggressive species could shatter it. We decided we would be that species, but with a purpose beyond simple conquest." "You're monsters," someone shouted from the assembly. Chen nodded. "Yes, we're monsters. But we're honest monsters. We don't pretend that words and good intentions will stop violence. We know that safety comes from strength. And we're going to rebuild your collective with that understanding at its foundation." He turned back to face the council. "The war continues until you accept unconditional surrender. Humanity will establish new rules for this region of space. Every species will maintain defensive capabilities. Every species will teach their children that actions have consequences. And every species will learn that some lines cannot be crossed. And what line did we cross? Thessera asked. You hurt our child and refused to accept responsibility. You chose procedures over justice. You valued your comfort over our pain. Those are lines no one crosses with humanity. Chen left the chamber. Behind him, the collective council descended into chaos. They had finally understood. They weren't fighting a war. They were being conquered. On Earth, the war dominated everything. Every news channel showed updates constantly. Maps displayed human advances into collective space. Casualties were reported daily, both human and alien. The public opinion was complicated. Many humans supported the war. They saw the footage of Emma Rodriguez and felt the same protective rage that drove the military. They watched Admiral Okonkwo's speeches and nodded in agreement. The aliens had hurt a human child and refused to make it right. This was justified, but others were disturbed. They saw the mounting death tolls and questioned whether one girl's injury justified killing millions. They watched videos of alien civilians fleeing human attacks and felt sympathy. They wondered if humanity had become the villains of its own story. The government controlled the narrative carefully. They released footage of human ships fighting bravely. They showed interviews with soldiers who talked about defending humanity's future. They emphasized that the collective had chosen this war by refusing to compromise. What they didn't show was what Admiral Okonkwo's fleet did between major battles. The systematic destruction of infrastructure, the blockades that cut off food supplies, the psychological warfare campaigns that drove entire planetary populations into panic. Emma's parents had retreated from public life. They had given one interview immediately after the war started, saying they supported seeking justice for their daughter. But as the war grew and casualties mounted, they stopped appearing in public. Rumors said they were horrified by what was happening in their daughter's name. Meanwhile, Celtics remained isolated on Harmony's Gate. The station itself had become a strange neutral ground. Collective administrators still ran it, but human forces surrounded it. They didn't attack, but they made it clear that nothing entered or left without their permission. Celtics had stopped following the war news. It was too much. Every day brought reports of more death, more destruction, and all of it because he had performed a cultural greeting incorrectly. The guilt was crushing. A collective psychologist visited him regularly. Her name was Dr. Yenara, and she was concerned about Celtics's mental state. He had stopped eating properly. He barely slept. He spent hours staring at nothing. This is not your fault, Dr. Yenara told him during one session. You followed protocols. The injury was an accident. No reasonable person would blame you. Humans blame me, Celtics responded. And humans are not reasonable. I've studied them, Doctor. I've read their history. Do you know what they do to people who hurt children? Dr. Yenara admitted she didn't. In their past, in some of their cultures, such people were executed. In others, they were imprisoned for life and subjected to violence from other prisoners. Even in their most civilized societies, harming children carries the severest punishments. And I hurt one of their children. It was an accident. That doesn't matter to them. Result is what matters. Intent is secondary. I hurt a child and now millions pay the price. Celtics looked at the psychologist with all three of his eyes. Do you know what I think about late at night? I wonder if I should just turn myself over to them. Let them do whatever they want to me. Maybe then the killing stops. That's not a healthy thought. Nothing about this situation is healthy, Doctor. We're in a war we cannot win. Fighting an enemy we don't understand over a principle we're not even sure we believe in anymore. At least if I surrendered, my death would mean something. But Celtics didn't surrender. The collective wouldn't let him even if he wanted to. He was a symbol now. Surrendering him would mean admitting that human demands were legitimate. That might made right. That violence was an acceptable response to accidents. So the war continued. Human forces pushed deeper into collective space. They captured systems, established military governments, began restructuring societies to align with human values. It wasn't random destruction anymore. It was systematic conquest. The occupied territories saw immediate changes. Human administrators arrived with plans for new legal systems, new education programs, new economic structures. They didn't try to make aliens into humans. Instead, they tried to make aliens understand human perspectives. Schools in occupied zones taught human history, Not as a horror story, but as a lesson. See what happens when species fight each other? See how destructive competition can be? Now understand why strength and clear rules matter more than good intentions. Some aliens accepted the occupation. They learned to speak English. They adopted human customs. They even began to appreciate certain aspects of human culture. Human food was interesting. Human music was energetic. Human technology worked well. Others resisted. Guerrilla groups formed, attacking human supply lines and administrative centers. The resistance achieved some local successes, but they couldn't match human military capabilities. For every human soldier killed, 10 resistors died. And throughout it all, Emma Rodriguez slept. Medical bulletins were released weekly. The girl's condition was stable. Her brain activity showed some improvement. Doctors were cautiously optimistic. But she hadn't woken yet. Some people prayed for her to wake, thinking it would end the war. Others prayed for her to stay asleep, knowing that her waking might not stop anything. The war had developed its own momentum. It had become about more than one girl in a coma. Admiral Okonkwo rarely gave speeches anymore. She was too busy running the war. But her staff released strategic updates that painted a clear picture. Humanity was winning decisively. The Collective's fleet was reduced to a quarter of its original strength. Over 40% of Collective territory was under human control or blockade. The timeline for complete victory was estimated at 18 months. Maybe less if the Collective continued to fracture. Already, 12 species had withdrawn from the alliance, declaring themselves neutral. They hoped humanity would leave them alone if they didn't fight. Humanity did leave them alone, but only temporarily. The message was clear. Neutrality was acceptable for now, but eventually everyone would have to choose. Be part of the new order or be outside it. There would be no middle ground. In the Collective's remaining free territory, life became harder every day. Human blockades cut off trade routes. Resource distribution broke down. Planets that had relied on imports faced shortages. Some faced starvation. The Collective Council debated relief missions, but any ship that tried to run the blockades was captured or destroyed. Humanitarian considerations didn't slow human military operations. If anything, humans used civilian suffering as leverage, broadcasting to blockaded worlds that surrender would bring immediate relief. It was warfare at a level of ruthless efficiency that the Collective had never imagined possible. Every human action served multiple purposes. Every battle accomplished strategic, tactical, and psychological objectives simultaneously. And at the center of it all, at the heart of every human justification, was the image of Emma Rodriguez, the sleeping girl who had become the symbol of humanity's grievance and the excuse for its conquest. Some aliens, studying human history, desperately trying to understand their enemy, found a quote from ancient Earth. It was attributed to a human leader named Julius Caesar. Veni, vidi vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. That seemed to summarize humanity's approach to the galaxy. They had come peacefully, pretending to be one species among many. They had seen the Collective's weaknesses, its reliance on rules over strength, and now they were conquering, remaking the galactic order in their image. The question nobody could answer was simple. When Emma woke up, would it end? Or had humanity discovered that it enjoyed conquest too much to stop? 6 months after the war began, Admiral Okonkwo's fleet arrived at the Collective's capital world. The planet was called Sanctuary, home to 15 billion beings from dozens of species. It was the symbolic heart of galactic civilization. Okonkwo didn't attack immediately. Instead, she broadcast a message to the planet below. You have 72 hours to evacuate council members and essential personnel. After that, we begin bombardment. Your capital falls. Your government ends. A new order begins. The message was calm, matter-of-fact. It could have been a weather report for all the emotion Okonkwo showed. This is your last chance to surrender with dignity. Accept our terms and the transition will be peaceful. Resist and we will demonstrate what human warfare looks like when we stop being merciful. On Sanctuary, panic spread like fire. 15 billion people couldn't evacuate in 72 hours. Maybe 10 million could escape if they were lucky. Everyone else would be trapped when the bombardment began. The Collective Council faced its final decision. Surrender unconditionally to humanity, or fight to the bitter end and watch their capital burn. They chose survival. 12 hours before Okonkwo's deadline expired, the Collective transmitted their unconditional surrender. The war was over. Humanity had won. But Emma Rodriguez still slept, and nobody knew what would happen when she woke. The surrender documents were signed aboard the human flagship Indomitable. Representatives from every collective species stood in a line, waiting their turn to formally accept humanity's terms. The ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy on all channels. Admiral Okonkwo watched from a raised platform as each representative approached the signing table. Some signed with steady hands. Others trembled. A few wept openly. None protested. They had seen what happened to those who resisted humanity. The terms were harsh. Celtics would be transferred to human custody immediately. Every species would provide complete intelligence on their military capabilities, industrial capacity, and resource reserves. A human oversight council would have veto authority over all major collective decisions. Most significantly, every species would adopt human legal frameworks for protecting children of all species. Ambassador Chen stood beside Okonkwo during the ceremony. He looked older than he had 6 months ago. The war had aged him in ways that showed in his eyes more than his face. "Do you feel satisfied?" Chen asked quietly. Okonkwo didn't look at him. "I feel efficient. We accomplished our objectives with acceptable losses." Acceptable losses. We lost 8,000 personnel. They lost millions. They chose to fight. We gave them opportunities to surrender. Chen was silent for a moment. Then he said something that made Okonkwo finally look at him. "Emma's parents want to see you." "Why?" "I don't know. They requested a meeting. I think you owe them that much." Okonkwo nodded slowly. "Schedule it for after the ceremony." The signing took 3 hours. When it finished, the collective officially ceased to exist as an independent alliance. It would continue in name, but humanity controlled it now. Every species understood the new reality. They lived under human authority, following human rules, existing at human pleasure. The meeting with Emma's parents happened in a private room on the Indomitable. Miguel and Maria Rodriguez looked exhausted. They had spent 6 months living in military hospitals, watching their daughter lie motionless while machines kept her alive. Admiral Okonkwo entered the room in full uniform, every ribbon and medal on display. She stood at attention and saluted the parents of a private citizen, something military officers rarely did. "Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez, you wanted to speak with me." Maria spoke first. Her voice was hoarse from crying. "Did you have to kill so many? Did you have to destroy so much?" Okonkwo had prepared for many questions, but not this one. She had expected gratitude, or perhaps questions about military strategy. Not accusations. "I did what was necessary to achieve our objectives." "Millions of people are dead," Miguel said. His hands shook. "Millions! Because of what happened to Emma. Because of us." "No. Because the collective chose to protect the person who hurt her rather than deliver justice." "Justice?" Maria's voice rose. "What justice requires millions of deaths? What justice turns our daughter into a symbol for conquest?" Okonkwo felt her carefully maintained composure crack slightly. "Your daughter represents every human child who might face danger in this galaxy. We fought this war to ensure no species ever again treats human suffering as less important than their laws." "You fought this war because you wanted to," Miguel said quietly. "Emma was just an excuse. We know that now. Everyone knows that." The room fell silent. Okonkwo wanted to argue, to explain strategic necessity and long-term planning. But looking at Emma's parents, seeing their pain and guilt, the words wouldn't come. "I'm sorry you feel that way," she finally said. "Are you sorry for what you did?" Maria asked. Okonkwo considered the question carefully. Was she sorry? She had followed her orders. She had won the war with minimal human casualties. She had established human dominance in this region of space. By every military metric, she had succeeded brilliantly. "No," she admitted. "I'm not sorry. I did my duty." Maria looked at her with something that might have been pity. "Then may God have mercy on your soul, Admiral. Because I don't think Emma will forgive any of us when she wakes up." The meeting ended shortly after. Okonkwo left feeling disturbed in ways she couldn't quite articulate. She had won the war. Why did it feel like she had lost something important? Celtics's transfer to human custody happened 3 days after the surrender ceremony. He was moved from Harmony's Gate to a human prison facility on an asteroid installation. The facility was secure, isolated, and specifically designed to hold non-human prisoners. Celtics expected torture or execution. Instead, he found himself in a comfortable cell with access to educational materials, regular meals, and medical care. A human lawyer was assigned to his case, someone who would represent him during trial. The lawyer's name was Jennifer Kim. She was a public defender who had volunteered for this assignment. Despite knowing it would make her unpopular among humans, Mr. Celtics, she said during their first meeting, "I want you to understand something. My job is to give you the best defense possible under human law. I don't care what the public thinks. I don't care what the government wants. I care about justice." Celtics looked at her with confusion. "Why would you help me?" "Your species went to war because of what I did. Because the law matters more than public opinion. Because even in times of war we have to maintain our principles. And because I actually read your case file, you followed proper protocols. The injury was genuinely accidental. I don't think you deserve to be punished." It was the first time in 6 months anyone had said that to him. Celtics felt something break inside him and he began to cry. Human legal proceedings would determine his fate, but at least someone believed he wasn't a monster. Meanwhile, the occupation of former collective territory proceeded systematically. Human administrators brought organization, infrastructure improvements, and education programs. They also brought surveillance, strict enforcement of new laws, and harsh penalties for resistance. Some worlds adapted quickly. They learned English, adopted human customs, integrated into the new order. Trade resumed under human supervision. Technology transfers happened on human terms. Life wasn't perfect, but it was stable. Other worlds struggled. Species that had been independent for centuries found human control suffocating. They resented the imposed laws, the mandatory education about human values, the constant presence of human military forces. Resistance movements sprouted across occupied space. They used guerrilla tactics, hitting targets when human forces were spread thin, then disappearing into civilian populations. They couldn't win militarily, but they could make occupation expensive. Human forces responded with overwhelming counterinsurgency operations. When resistance fighters attacked from a city, humans cordoned off the entire district and searched every building. When supplies for resistance came from a region, humans blockaded that region until the population turned over the fighters. It was effective but brutal. Collective species learned quickly that harboring resistance was more painful than accepting occupation. Admiral Okonkwo personally oversaw the occupation for the first 3 months after surrender. She established military governments on key worlds, set up supply lines, organized patrol routes. She did everything correctly according to military doctrine. But she also started noticing things that troubled her. Human soldiers who enjoyed their power a bit too much. Administrators who were more interested in control than justice. Civilians in occupied territories who looked at humans with fear rather than respect. This wasn't how she had imagined victory would feel. One night, Okonkwo received a call from her own daughter, who was studying at university on Earth. The girl was 17, close to Emma's age before the coma. "Mom, people are protesting the occupation. They say we've become the villains. They don't understand military necessity," Okonkwo responded automatically. "Don't they? I've been watching the occupation footage. I've seen how our soldiers treat alien civilians. We're not liberators, Mom. We're conquerors. We're establishing order. We're establishing empire. There's a difference." The call ended badly with both of them frustrated, but Okonkwo couldn't forget her daughter's words. Were they liberators or conquerors? Had they fought for justice or for power? 6 months into the occupation, patterns began emerging in the resistance movements. The fighters weren't random terrorists. They were organized, trained, and equipped better than they should be. Someone was supporting them. Human intelligence traced the supply chains and made a surprising discovery. The resistance was being supplied by other humans, specifically by human groups who opposed the occupation and wanted to help aliens fight back. It was a crisis that Okonkwo hadn't anticipated. Civil conflict within humanity itself over the morality of what they'd done. The government tried to suppress information about human resistance supporters, but leaks happened. Soon everyone knew that humanity wasn't unified in its conquest. The collective species found this information fascinating and hopeful. If humans disagreed about the occupation, maybe there was a chance to negotiate different terms. Maybe they could drive a wedge between human factions. But they underestimated human tribalism. Even humans who opposed the occupation weren't willing to side with aliens against their own species. They wanted change from within, not alien intervention. The political landscape on Earth became complicated. Peace movements grew. Veterans organizations defended the occupation. Politicians took different positions based on their constituencies. The unified human front that had won the war began showing cracks. Through all of this, Emma Rodriguez remained in her coma. Medical reports showed continued improvement in brain activity. Doctors were increasingly confident she would wake, but they couldn't predict when. Miguel and Maria Rodriguez had become semi-public figures despite their wishes. Peace activists held them up as examples of how war caused pain, even for those it claimed to protect. Pro-war voices said their daughter's injury justified everything humans had done. The parents tried to stay out of politics. They just wanted their daughter back. But their silence was interpreted differently by different groups. Everyone projected their own views onto the sleeping girl and her grieving parents. Celthix's trial began 9 months after the war ended. It was held at The Hague on Earth, broadcast across the galaxy. Jennifer Kim presented a vigorous defense, arguing that Celthix had followed all proper protocols, and the injury was an unforeseeable accident. The prosecution argued that Celthix's negligence in not thoroughly researching human biology before performing the greeting constituted criminal recklessness. They pushed for a life sentence. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Expert witnesses testified about human neurochemistry, Braxian bioelectricity, and safety protocols. The evidence clearly showed that Celthix had done nothing intentionally wrong. But the jury, composed entirely of humans per the surrender terms, had to decide between strict legal principles and public pressure. They deliberated for 2 days. The verdict: guilty of negligent harm, sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. It was a compromise verdict, not the life sentence the prosecutors wanted, not the acquittal the defense argued for. 15 years that acknowledged harm occurred while recognizing it wasn't malicious. Celthix accepted the sentence without protest. He was exhausted from the trial, from the guilt, from everything. 15 years seemed like mercy compared to the millions who had died because of his mistake. Jennifer Kim appealed immediately, arguing the sentence was too harsh for an accident. But appeals would take years, and everyone knew it. Meanwhile, life in occupied territories settled into a new normal. Human military presence became routine. Alien children learned English in schools alongside their native languages. Human businesses opened on alien worlds. Cultural exchange happened, but on unequal terms. Some species genuinely began integrating with humanity. They saw advantages in human technology, human organization, human protection. They started thinking of themselves as junior partners in a human-led galactic order, rather than conquered peoples. Other species nursed their resentment silently, waiting for any opportunity to regain independence. They taught their children about life before humanity, about the peaceful collective that had been destroyed, about the injustice of occupation. Admiral Okonkwo watched all of this with growing unease. She had won the war, but was she winning the peace? Or had humanity created a situation that would require permanent military occupation to maintain? She requested a meeting with Ambassador Chen, who had been appointed as the senior civilian administrator for occupied territories. They met in Okonkwo's office on Harmony's Gate, which now served as the headquarters for human occupation forces. "David, tell me honestly, did we do the right thing?" Chen looked at her for a long moment. He seemed older too, worn down by the weight of administering conquered worlds. "We did what humanity always does. We saw a threat. We responded with overwhelming force, and we rebuilt the world in our image. Whether that's right or wrong depends on your definition of justice. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. We protected human interests. We established human dominance. We prevented future incidents like Emma's injury. By those metrics, yes, we did the right thing. But we also killed millions, traumatized billions, and created enemies that will hate us for generations. By those metrics, we did something monstrous." Okonkwo nodded slowly. "So we're both heroes and villains. We're human. We've always been both." The conversation ended without resolution because there was no resolution to be found. Humanity had won its war and conquered its enemies. Now it had to live with the consequences. And still, Emma Rodriguez slept, unaware of the galaxy that had been reshaped in her name, unaware of the millions who had died because she was hurt, unaware that she had become the most significant human in history without ever waking up. But her brainwaves continued to strengthen. Her body continued to heal. The doctors said it was only a matter of time now. The galaxy waited nervously for a little girl to open her eyes, knowing that what happened next would determine whether humanity had fought a war of justice or conquest. Emma Rodriguez woke up on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year and 3 days after the incident. The nurses noticed her vital signs changing first, heart rate increasing, brain activity spiking, eye movement under her lids. Dr. Sarah Chen, the human physician who had supervised Emma's care throughout the coma, was called immediately. She arrived within minutes and found Emma's eyes open, confused but aware. Emma, can you hear me? I'm Dr. Chen, you're safe. You're in a hospital. Can you squeeze my hand if you understand? Emma squeezed. The gesture was weak but deliberate. Dr. Chen felt tears in her eyes. After a year of waiting, the girl was finally awake. Miguel and Maria Rodriguez were contacted immediately. They had been living in quarters adjacent to the hospital, never far from their daughter. They rushed to her bedside, both crying, both trying to explain what had happened while being careful not to overwhelm her. Emma listened with growing confusion. She had been hurt at a festival. She had been asleep for a year. Her parents kept using words like coma and recovery, but also words like war and occupation that made no sense. What war? Emma asked. Her voice was hoarse from a year of disuse. Miguel and Maria looked at each other. How do you tell an 8-year-old girl that millions died because she was hurt? How do you explain that her injury became an excuse for conquest? They decided to start simple. They told her that the accident at the festival had caused big problems between humans and aliens. That there had been fighting. That things were different now. They promised to explain more as she got stronger. Emma accepted this explanation, too weak and confused to ask deeper questions. She drifted back to sleep, exhausted by the simple act of waking. But the news of her awakening spread across the galaxy faster than light. Within hours, every human colony knew. Within days, every alien world knew. The girl at the center of the war was awake. The reactions were complicated and contradictory. Some humans celebrated, believing her recovery vindicated the war. If she was okay, then everything they had done was worth it. Others felt guilt, wondering if she would approve of the millions who died in her name. Alien reactions ranged from relief to anger. Some hoped her awakening would mean an end to harsh occupation policies. Others resented that one child's recovery was treated as more important than millions of deaths. Admiral Okonkwo sent a message to Emma's parents, asking permission to visit when the girl was strong enough. She wanted to see for herself that Emma was truly recovering. She also wanted to understand if this child could somehow justify everything that had happened. Ambassador Chen also requested a visit, but his motivations were different. He needed to see Emma, to confront the human face behind the abstraction of war. He had spent a year administering conquered territories in her name. He needed to know if she was real or just a symbol. Emma's recovery was faster than expected. The physical therapy was intensive but effective. Her burns had healed, though she would carry scars. Her neurological function returned rapidly, surprising the doctors. Within 2 weeks of waking, she could walk short distances. Within a month, she could hold conversations. But as Emma grew stronger physically, she began learning about what had happened during her coma. The nurses tried to shield her from news broadcasts. Her parents carefully edited what they told her. But children are curious, and hospitals have many people with many opinions. Emma overheard conversations between medical staff. She saw news headlines on tablets that people forgot to turn off. She asked questions that her parents struggled to answer honestly. How many people died in the war? Why did we attack them if it was an accident? Is the alien who hurt me still alive? Miguel and Maria tried to answer age-appropriately. They emphasized that adults had made complicated decisions for complicated reasons. They stressed that Emma had done nothing wrong, that none of this was her fault. But Emma was bright and she understood more than they realized. She pieced together the truth from fragments of overheard conversations and carefully worded explanations. A war had been fought because she was hurt. Millions had died. Her species had conquered half the galaxy while she slept. The realization devastated her. Emma stopped talking for 3 days, processing emotions too complex for a 9-year-old mind. Her parents worried she was relapsing, but Dr. Chen assured them this was psychological rather than physical. On the 4th day, Emma spoke again. She had a request that shocked everyone. I want to meet Celtics, the Vraxian who hurt me. I want to talk to him. Miguel immediately protested. Emma, no. You don't need to see him. He's in prison. He can't hurt you anymore. I don't think he wanted to hurt me before. I want to know what happened. I want to hear his side. Maria tried to explain that it might be traumatic, that Emma didn't owe her attacker anything, that she should focus on healing. But Emma was insistent with the quiet determination that children sometimes possess. The request created a bureaucratic nightmare. Celtics was a convicted criminal in maximum security detention. Emma was a child victim and a symbol of human suffering. Allowing them to meet violated every standard protocol. But Emma's parents, worn down by their daughter's insistence, petitioned the authorities. They argued that if the war had been about Emma, then Emma should have some say in what happened next. The petition eventually reached Admiral Okonkwo's desk. She was surprised to find herself approving it. Maybe she wanted to see what would happen. Maybe she was curious if a child could find forgiveness where adults had found only vengeance. The meeting was arranged at the prison facility where Celtics was held. Security was extreme. Human guards monitored everything. Medical staff stood ready in case Emma showed signs of trauma. Jennifer Kim, still acting as Celtics' lawyer, attended to ensure her client wasn't exploited. Celtics was brought to a visiting room designed for low-risk interactions. He looked smaller than Emma remembered, more fragile. A year of imprisonment had worn him down physically and emotionally. Emma entered with her parents on either side. She stopped when she saw Celtics, remembering that moment at the festival, remembering the pain. But she had asked for this meeting, so she stepped forward. "Hello," she said simply. Celtics looked at the small human girl he had accidentally hurt. He had imagined this moment many times during his imprisonment. He had practiced speeches, apologies, explanations. But faced with her actual presence, words failed him. "I am so sorry," he finally managed. "I never meant to hurt you. I followed all the proper procedures. I thought it was safe. I have thought about that day every moment since it happened. I would give anything to undo it." Emma studied him carefully. She had learned to read human emotions well, but alien expressions were harder. Still, she could hear sincerity in his translated words. "I know it was an accident," Emma said. "My parents told me. The doctors told me. I've read about it. You didn't do anything wrong on purpose." Celtics felt something break inside him at those words. After a year of guilt, a year of imprisonment, the victim herself was saying he didn't do anything wrong on purpose. "But millions died because of what I did," Celtics said. "Your species went to war. Entire worlds were destroyed. How can I live with that?" Emma's response was quiet but firm. "You didn't start the war. The grown-ups did. They made choices. Bad choices. Choices I don't understand and don't think were right." She looked at her parents, then at the guards, then back at Celtics. "Everyone keeps saying the war was about me. But nobody asked me what I wanted. I didn't want people to die because I got hurt. I never wanted any of this." The room fell silent. The simple truth from a child's mouth cut through a year of justifications and rationalizations. Emma didn't want the war. The person the war was supposedly fought for rejected the war itself. The meeting lasted only 30 minutes. Emma was still weak and the emotional intensity was exhausting. But before she left, she did something that shocked everyone in the room. She walked up to the reinforced barrier separating her from Celtics and placed her hand against it. "I forgive you. What happened was an accident. You don't deserve to be punished for an accident." Celtics placed his hand against the barrier opposite hers, separated by transparent material but connected by a gesture of grace that neither species had shown during the war. News of the meeting spread quickly. Human media outlets debated what it meant. Some praised Emma's compassion. Others worried she was too young to understand the situation. Pro-war voices dismissed her forgiveness as irrelevant to larger strategic concerns. But Emma's forgiveness created cracks in the narrative that had sustained the war and occupation. If the victim forgave her attacker, what justified continued harsh treatment of conquered peoples? If a child could show mercy, why couldn't governments? Admiral Okonkwo watched footage of the meeting 3 times. Each time she felt more conflicted. A 9-year-old girl had shown more wisdom and compassion than military commanders and politicians combined. What did that say about the adults who had fought a war in her name? Emma's next request was even more controversial. She wanted to give a speech at the memorial service for war victims, both humans and aliens. She wanted to speak about forgiveness and healing. The government tried to discourage this. They worried about what she might say. They worried about undermining support for the occupation. They worried that a child's words might undo a year of careful political messaging. But public pressure was overwhelming. Emma had become a symbol despite never asking for it. People wanted to hear what she had to say. Denying her a platform would look like suppressing an innocent victim. The memorial service was held at Harmony's Gate, the station where everything began. Representatives from every species attended. Human military personnel stood alongside former collective diplomats. Survivors of occupied worlds gathered with resistance members who had laid down arms. Emma stood at a podium designed for adults, barely visible over its edge. A step stool was brought out so she could be seen. She held a speech she had written herself, though her parents had helped with some of the longer words. "My name is Emma Rodriguez. A year ago I was hurt in an accident. I was hurt badly and went to sleep for a long time. While I was asleep, terrible things happened. People fought a war. Millions died. They said the war was about me, but I never wanted a war." Her voice was small but clear. The audio system carried it to every corner of the station and broadcast it across the galaxy. "I met the person who hurt me. His name is Kelthix. He didn't mean to hurt me. It was an accident. I forgave him because that's what you do with accidents. You don't start wars over accidents." Emma looked around at the gathered representatives, at the human military officers in their uniforms, at the alien diplomats in their various forms. Grown-ups tell kids that violence is wrong. They tell us to use words, not fists. They tell us to forgive mistakes. But then grown-ups used my accident as an excuse to hurt people. That's not fair. That's not right. Some people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded in agreement. Everyone listened. I don't know how to fix what happened. I'm just a kid, but I know we have to stop being angry. I know we have to forgive each other. I know we have to be better than we were. Emma's voice wavered slightly. She was getting emotional, but she pushed through. To all the aliens who lost family in the war, I'm sorry. I'm sorry my species did this. I'm sorry people died because of me. I didn't want it. I would take it all back if I could. To all the humans who fought, I know you thought you were protecting me, but I don't need protection that hurts other people. I need a galaxy where everyone tries to understand each other, where accidents don't become reasons for war. Emma folded her speech and looked directly at the camera broadcasting to the galaxy. If you did things during the war that you're not proud of, I forgive you. If you hurt people because you were hurt, I forgive you. If you made mistakes because you were scared or angry, I forgive you. But now we have to do better. We have to be better. For all the people who died, we have to make sure this never happens again. She stepped down from the podium. The room was silent for a long moment. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Soon the entire memorial service was applauding a 9-year-old girl who had shown more moral clarity than empires. Emma's speech became the most watched broadcast in human history. It was translated into every known language. It was debated in every government chamber across occupied space. It was taught in schools as an example of moral courage. More importantly, it changed the conversation. People who had justified the war found themselves questioning their positions. Politicians who had supported harsh occupation policies faced pressure to moderate. Military officers who had enforced strict control began wondering if mercy was stronger than force. The changes didn't happen overnight. Governments don't reverse course quickly, but Emma's words planted seeds that would grow. Within 6 months of her speech, Kelthix's sentence was commuted. He wouldn't be freed entirely, but he was moved to house arrest with minimal supervision. Jennifer Kim had successfully argued that Emma's forgiveness should be factored into his sentence. Within a year, the first occupied territories regained partial autonomy. Human oversight remained, but local governments were allowed to function again. Trade restrictions eased. Movement between systems became less restricted. The changes were gradual, but they represented a fundamental shift. Humanity had conquered through force. Now they were learning to rule through cooperation, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. Admiral Okonkwo retired from active duty 18 months after Emma's speech. She had served with distinction, won a war decisively, and established human dominance. But she couldn't reconcile her military achievements with a child's moral condemnation. In her retirement speech, she said something that surprised everyone. "We won the war, but Emma Rodriguez won the peace. History will remember her more than it remembers me, And that's probably as it should be. Ambassador Chen remained as the senior civilian administrator for another 3 years. He worked to implement reconciliation programs, restore damaged infrastructure, and build genuine partnerships between human and alien communities. It was harder than fighting the war had been, but more rewarding. 5 years after Emma woke from her coma, the galaxy looked different than it had before the war. Human influence was undeniable. English was spoken everywhere. Human legal concepts shaped justice systems across dozens of worlds. Human military bases remained operational in key systems, but it wasn't the empire of conquest that many had feared. Emma's influence had pushed humanity toward partnership, rather than domination. Schools taught both human and alien history. Courts included both human and alien judges. Governments shared power between species. The new system wasn't perfect. Resentments lingered. Some species still chafed under human oversight. Some humans still believed in pure dominance rather than cooperation. Conflicts arose regularly, but there was a framework now for resolving conflicts peacefully. There were examples of forgiveness to point to. There was Emma's speech played in schools across the galaxy, reminding everyone that violence should be the last resort, not the first. Emma herself grew up in the strangest circumstances imaginable. She was simultaneously the most famous child in the galaxy and a relatively normal girl trying to finish her education. She had bodyguards who followed her everywhere. She received letters from across space. She turned down countless interview requests. Mostly she wanted to be normal. She studied hard, made friends, played with her dog. She visited Celtics occasionally, and they developed an unlikely friendship. He taught her about Vraxian culture. She taught him about human childhood. They were bound by the accident that had changed everything, but they chose to make that bond mean something positive. On Emma's 13th birthday, she gave another speech. It was shorter this time, recorded in her family's living room rather than at a grand ceremony. When I was 8, I got hurt in an accident. When I was 9, I woke up and learned that my hurt had been used to justify terrible things. Now I'm 13 and I want to say something to everyone who's still angry about the war. Emma looked directly into the camera with the confidence of someone who had learned hard lessons. Young, holding on to anger doesn't change the past. It only poisons the future. Humans did terrible things during the war. So did some aliens. Everyone made mistakes. Everyone has regrets. But we can't move forward if we're always looking backward with hate. She smiled slightly. I'm not saying forget what happened. Remember it. Learn from it. Use it to be better. But don't let it make you cruel. Don't let it stop you from seeing people, human or alien, as individuals rather than enemies. The war happened because adults forgot how to forgive accidents. Don't make that mistake again. When someone hurts you without meaning to, choose forgiveness. When you make a mistake, apologize sincerely. When you're angry, take a breath before you act. These are simple things, but they prevent wars. Emma's message was simpler than her first speech, but perhaps more profound. She had distilled 5 years of observation and thought into basic principles that even children could understand. The message resonated differently than her first speech. That one had been about immediate forgiveness in the shadow of war. This one was about building a lasting peace through daily choices. 10 years after the war ended, Emma Rodriguez was 18 years old. She enrolled at university to study interspecies relations and conflict resolution. She said in an interview that she wanted to help prevent future conflicts from escalating the way hers had. I can't undo what happened, she told the interviewer, but I can try to make sure it never happens again. That's the only way to honor everyone who died. Celtics, now free from all restrictions, had become an advocate for better cultural exchange protocols. He worked with the collective's Reformed Safety Commission to ensure that the kind of accident that had hurt Emma would be impossible in the future. Every cultural demonstration now required extensive biological compatibility testing. The galaxy that emerged from the war and its aftermath was complicated. Human influence was everywhere, but it was softer than it had been during the occupation. The initial conquest had given way to grudging cooperation, which had slowly evolved into genuine partnership in many places. Some historians called it the accidental empire, an empire built on a mistake, maintained through force but ultimately transformed by mercy. Others simply called it the human peace, acknowledging both the violence that established it and the relative stability that followed. The legal framework that emerged from the war became known as the Rodriguez Accords. They established universal protections for vulnerable individuals of all species, not just children. They created mechanisms for handling cross-species accidents without resorting to war. They balanced the need for justice with the recognition that mistakes happen. Emma didn't attend the signing ceremony for the Accords, even though they bore her name. She said through a spokesperson that the Accords should stand on their own merit, not on her symbolic importance, but she did visit the memorial on Harmony's Gate every year on the anniversary of the war's end. She placed flowers for both human and alien victims. She stood in silence for an hour, remembering people she had never met who died because she was hurt. Ambassador Chen, now retired and quite old, sometimes joined her at these memorial visits. They would stand together, the diplomat who had helped start the war and the girl it had been fought over, both carrying guilt for things beyond their control. "Do you think it was worth it?" Emma asked him during one of these visits. She was 25 now, old enough to understand complex moral questions. Chen took a long time to answer. "The war itself? Never. Wars are never worth their cost. But what came after? The reforms? The understanding between species, the frameworks we built? Maybe those things could only have happened after we hit bottom. Maybe we had to see the worst of ourselves to commit to being better." "That's a depressing thought," Emma said. "That progress requires catastrophe. It is depressing, but it's also hopeful, because it means even from terrible mistakes, good things can grow. The war was wrong. What we did was wrong. But what you taught us about forgiveness, that was right, and it changed everything." Emma looked at the memorial wall, covered with names in dozens of languages. "I just wish they didn't have to die for adults to learn lessons that children already know." Chen had no answer to that. There was no answer. The galaxy that humanity had violently reshaped eventually reshaped humanity in return. Living alongside aliens daily, working with them, learning from them, it changed human culture. Humans became less insular, less defensive, less quick to see threats and differences. Not all humans changed. There were still supremacist groups who believed humanity should rule through force. There were still territories where occupation was harsh and resentment festered. The galaxy was large enough to contain contradictions. But the direction of change was clear. The next generation of humans, children who grew up alongside aliens as classmates and friends, didn't carry the same prejudices their parents had. They saw the galaxy as their home, not just human space. Emma Rodriguez lived a long, complex life. She never fully escaped being a symbol, but she managed to be more than just that. She worked as a mediator in several major interspecies disputes. She wrote books about conflict resolution. She taught at universities across multiple worlds. She married a human engineer and had 3 children. She made sure they grew up understanding what had happened during the war, but also understanding their responsibility to be better. When historians interviewed her later in life, she always emphasized the same points. Accidents happen. Forgiveness is powerful. Violence should always be the last option, not the first. Simple principles that she had learned as a child and spent a lifetime reinforcing. The Vraxian people eventually erected a statue of Emma and Celtics on their homeworld. It showed them with hands touching through a barrier, the gesture of forgiveness from their meeting in the prison. The inscription was simple. From accident came war. From war came understanding. From understanding came peace. Humanity's conquest of the collective became one of history's strange turning points, a war of aggression that somehow led to a more just galactic order, not because the war was justified, but because the response to it forced everyone to confront their failures. Military academies taught the war as a case study in how overwhelming force can win battles but not necessarily peace. They taught Emma's speech as an example of moral courage. They taught that the strongest weapon isn't always physical force. The memorial on Harmony's Gate eventually became a pilgrimage site. People from across the galaxy visited to remember the war and recommit to peace. The station itself was preserved as a reminder of both the best and worst of galactic civilization. Emma lived to see humanity's influence spread across the galaxy, not through conquest but through example. She saw human principles of justice adapted by aliens, just as humans adapted alien concepts of community. She saw genuine friendship between species that had once been enemies. She also lived long enough to see new conflicts arise. The galaxy was too large, too diverse for perfect peace. But the conflicts were managed differently now. The Rodriguez Accords provided frameworks. Mediators were called before militaries. Accidents were investigated rather than punished. In her 80s, Emma gave her final public speech. She was frail, her voice weak, but her message was strong. I was 8 when I was hurt. I'm 83 now. I've lived my entire life in the shadow of a war I never wanted. I've carried guilt for deaths I didn't cause. I've tried to make meaning from tragedy. She paused, gathering strength. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. We are all capable of terrible things when we're afraid or angry. Every species, every individual. But we're also capable of extraordinary compassion and forgiveness. The choice between those two capabilities defines who we are. The war that was fought in my name was a failure of compassion, but the peace that followed was a triumph of forgiveness. Remember both. Learn from both. Be better than we were. Emma Rodriguez died peacefully 2 years later, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. The news of her death was met with genuine grief across the galaxy. Memorial services were held on hundreds of worlds. But her legacy lived on in the structures she had influenced, the conflicts she had helped resolve, and the billions of people across the galaxy who had learned from her example that forgiveness was stronger than vengeance. The galaxy that humanity had conquered through violence had been transformed through mercy. Not perfectly, not completely, but meaningfully. And at the center of it all was a girl who had been hurt in an accident and chose to respond with grace rather than hatred. A girl who had shown that sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who refuses to strike back. Historians would debate for generations whether the war had been necessary, whether good ends justified evil means, whether humanity's conquest had been ultimately beneficial or catastrophic. There were arguments for all sides and no definitive answers. But everyone agreed on one thing. Emma Rodriguez had been the conscience of a species and an age. She had reminded everyone, human and alien alike, that their better nature was always available if they chose to access it. The war was humanity's shame. Emma's forgiveness was humanity's redemption. And in the end, that was what followed when one human child was hurt. Not just war, not just conquest, but also mercy, forgiveness, and the slow, difficult work of building something better from the ruins of violence. The galaxy moved forward, carrying its scars but also its lessons, and somewhere in the collective memory of 1,000 species, the image remained, a small girl placing her hand against a barrier, offering forgiveness to someone who had hurt her, showing that peace begins with individual choices to be kind rather than cruel. That was what followed. That was what would always be remembered.